Foundations of Amateur Radio. One of the first questions a new amateur asks is, which radio should I buy? It's a topic I've discussed at length, and the answer, it depends, is unhelpful without doing more research. But after you've done the work, you'll be able to answer it for yourself. A question that is just as important, but not asked nearly enough, frankly I've not heard it in the decade I've been part of this community, is, how should I build my shack? The answer is just as useful. It depends. So, let's explore what precisely your shack design depends on. Let me start with pointing out that I'm not here to give you answers. You can watch hundreds of YouTube videos, read a gazillion web pages, and get no closer than discover how others have answered this question. It wasn't until recently that I understood that it was a question at all, but airing my frustration at the level of dysfunction of my shack unearthed it, and in attempting to answer my own question, I started to explore the landscape. As with choosing a first radio, one of the very first answers you need for yourself about the ideal shack is, what do you want to use it for? That in and of itself is not enough. I had an answer for that. I want to operate my weekly net, I want to do casual HF contesting, have a beacon running, and have space for experimentation. It wasn't until Ben, Victor Kilo 6 November Charlie Bravo, suggested that I dedicate a single radio to the weekly net and the contesting, and use the other for experimentation, that I discovered that this wasn't going to work for me. I want to be able to use both my radios at the same time, in a so-called single operator two-radio setup, or SO2R. This will allow me to extend the boundaries of my comfort zone, and in doing so will give me plenty of new things to learn. So the question, what do you want to use your shack for, is probably the single most important thing you need to discover. If you're like me, the obvious answer is everything. But reality soon sets in, and you might start to create an actual list of things that you want to do. Prompted by Ben's suggestion, I was able to articulate for the very first time something that I didn't want to do. I didn't want to set a radio aside for experimentation. So, when you're considering what you want to achieve, also think about what you don't want. For example, I have no interest in using the 6-meter band at this time. Not because it's a bad band, far from it. It's because I'm not permitted to use it with my current license. Same for the 23-centimeter band. This means that I don't have to find ways of making my shack accommodate those two bands. My current license permits me access to precisely 6 bands, and the station I'm building only needs to access those bands at the moment. That brings me to the next question for the ideal shack design. How long do you expect the layout to last? For example, are you going to build a new building for your shack for the next 50 years, or is it something that's going to last for the weekend? Is your shack going to be moved, or is it something a little more permanent? Are you going to change your needs, and should you incorporate some of that into your design? Or are you perfectly happy with what you're doing today? You have to remember, this is your shack, not mine, not your friends, yours. It means that it needs to accommodate what you want. The next question, boring as it might be, how much money are you going to spend? Building a whole new shack out of the catalogue is perfectly fine, but you might discover that the gear you have today is ample to get your shack started. You might leave space for a different piece of kit, or you might decide that the shack needs changing when a new shiny piece of equipment arrives in a nondescript brown box. Some other things to consider are what operating actually looks like. I've seen shack videos that look like a tour through a radio museum with more radios than I have keys on my keyboard, sometimes all connected, other times just stored on shelves to look at. Are you going to have more than one radio operating at the same time? And if so, how are you planning to control them? How many antennas are connected to this shack, and how do you track which antenna is connected to which radio? What are you going to do about power? Does everything run on mains power, or are you going to build a 13.8 volt supply for all your gear? Where are you planning to put computer screens? What about keyboard, mouse, Morse key, and antenna switching controls? In other words, what do the ergonomics of your shack look like? Remember, there is no right answer. The answer you come up with is yours and yours alone. Look at things that work for you, and take note of things that make you wince when you see it in another shack somewhere. That's not to say you should be dismissive, rather use the opportunity to ask the shack owner why they made that choice. Who knows, it might cover something you hadn't considered yet. So, what does your ideal shack look like? I'm Ono, Victor Kilo 6, Foxtrot Lima, Alpha Bravo.